David with Liguori Drag Racing, and in this video I'm going to go over gear shift output and how we use it on our motorcycles. Under drag race features, gear shift output. If you do not have gear shift output in your drag race features, come down to engine settings, map options, and select gear shift output. You can then select gear shift output here, and it will take you directly to drag race features in the gear shift output. You can select automatic shift by RPM, manual upshift input button, and automatic shift by RPM and manual upshift button allowed. You can select a engine RPM for the RPM source or an input shaft. Engine RPM is normally what all we go with. You can lock time between each gear shift. So for example, anything besides the 1 to 2 gear change. So this is a lock time between a gear shift. So this would be anything between 2, 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6. You can lock a time. So if it spins on a shift or bumpy track or anything like that where it shouldn't be shifting right after another, you can set a specific time to lock the time so it won't shift for a half a second after a gear change is made. Single output per gear. This is only using one solenoid for one shifter. The pulse of that solenoid being on is typically anywhere from 1/4 of a second, 0.25, up to about 0.35. 0.3, so 0.3 of a second is normal, and that's normally what I try to go with. I always recommend on gear shift output using a ground signal with a blue output. Ground with a blue output. For automatic shifting, you can set a single value or you can set a each gear value. When you select a manual upshift button, this goes gray and you can't adjust it. For automatic shift by RPM, you can have a 1 to 2 minimum gear time, so the bike will not shift if it spins off the starting line or you forget to put it in first gear and you're going to neutral drop it. If you catch it within that 1 second or whatever you have it preset here, it will not shift for at least 1 second after the launch. Power reduction during gear shift. This is where you're killing the bike during a gear shift. Power reduction delay after output activation. What this means is the kill is 2/100ths after the output for the solenoid is active. So it activates the solenoid first, and then 2/100ths later, which is normal, about 0.2 is normal, 0.2 later, it will then kill the bike or power reduct it. You can put a minimum engine RPM for power reduction. Typically above idle is what I usually put it at, or just whatever default is. You can have a cut mode of ignition or fuel and ignition. Power reduction duration. This is your kill time. This is the time that the engine is being killed and or drop the timing in order to shift the bike. So for example, this is a 1 through 4 auto with a 4 to 5 and 5 to 6 kill. If it was a full kill transmission, just back cut, you would have something like 50 milliseconds. 50 milliseconds, maybe 0.45, and then 0.40, 0.40. This is in milliseconds here. So, for example, 1.00 is 1,000 milliseconds. 0.1 would be 100 milliseconds, and so forth. So you can change kill time per gear. Ignition timing during power reduction. This is what the ignition timing drops to during this time. So for example, if you have 50 milliseconds at 1 to 2 gear change, your timing will drop to 20 degrees at a 50 millisecond time. If you don't want it to if you don't want it to pull timing, then you just set this at whatever your ignition map is. If your ignition map is 34 degrees and you're not running any nitrous or boost or anything like that, you just set it at 34 degrees and it won't drop the timing for that gear change. Ignition cut on power reduction. This is how much the ignition is cut. 90% is normal for me. A lot of guys will drop more timing, so they'll drop timing to like -10 and then have ignition cut at say 50% or 20%. So you can really customize this to what you want. Normally something like this is what I try to go for. And then activate closed loop power reduction duration according to next gear detected. This will only work if you have a gear position sensor, and your gear position sensor needs to be very quick and accurate. What this does is you could have 100 milliseconds into 1 and 2 gear time, and if this is active and it only physically takes the bike 50 milliseconds to make the shift, it will add the power back in after that. So you can have whatever you want set here, but if it only physically takes the bike 50 milliseconds, that's the only power it's going to use, and then it's going to put the power back into it. So that is gear shift output. And one other thing that I want to show you guys is gear change detection. So the gear change detection goes along with gear change or gear shift output. And if you don't have gear change detection, then you need to go to map options and select gear change detection here. If you have a good analog gear position sensor, you can put your gear voltages in here, and you can have a certain detection window. If you don't, if you have a KZ, a GS, or something that doesn't have a gear position sensor, or if you don't have a good gear position sensor, an accurate one, normally we go off of by gear shift output. So it's going to count the gears. So when you push the 2-step button in, it's going to think that it's in first gear because it's going to think that you're launching the bike. And that gear reset source is your 2-step button here. Once you let go of the button and you start going down track, and it sends an output from the gear shift output, the output signal, whether it be you hit a upshift button or it hits the automatic gear shift RPM, it will then count to the next gear to number 2, and then so forth down the track. So it'll count every time that the gear shift output is active. So I hope this video gives you an overview of the gear shift output, and I hope you learned something. Like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos. Thanks.